Hi, this is Steve Williams. I'm here in beautiful San Diego for the 2013 IPC Apex. We're here with real-time IPC, and the topic of discussion today is how do we bring manufacturing back into North America? I'll introduce my panel. We've got Eric Miscoll, Managing Partner at Charlie Barnhart & Associates, Shane Whiteside, the COO of TTM Technologies, and Yash Sutariya, President, Saturn Flex. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just throw out a couple of facts first before we get going. 1950, 60% of the American employees were in the manufacturing sector. In 2010, that's dropped down to 20%. Less than 20% of America's GDP is in manufacturing. So that means that 80% of our revenue as a country comes from the service industry. If we scale that down and look at just the PCB industry, North American operations, we've seen a 75% decline in the last couple of decades, 31% in the last 8 years. So in 1985, we had 1,500 PCB operations in North America. As of last week, we've got 336.
And out of those, how many are just a shingle and brokering versus manufacturing?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep, there's the whole metric. How do you measure what's American dollars? And absolutely. I'll start out with you, Eric. Apple just recently announced that they're going to move about $100 million of manufacturing back to the U.S. on their Mac products. You know, regionalization, reshoring, is that a buzzword? Is it a manufacturing renaissance here for the U.S., or is it just a pipe dream?
Yeah, a couple of good issues in there. First of all, the Apple issue, yeah, it's $100 million, but it's also the lowest number of products they produce if you pick a product line. So I think that's, we'll see what that actually means.
$100 million is a drop in the bucket for Apple, right?
That's nothing.
And what is the $100 million comprised of? Is it, I mean, if they're doing just the final assembly, the actual value add component is so small because it's all purchased parts, right?
And that's what I mean. I think it was a good press release. We'll see what it actually means. And as with Apple, things tend to be a little veiled, and so we'll see. As to the terms, is there a renaissance? You know, reshoring is a buzzword. I mean, so the data points to regionalization, has been, and it's not just here in North America, but it's around the world, right? It is built in region for region. It's more efficient. You know, listen, if you're, the analogy we like to use is if you're growing hay to feed cows, it's more efficient to build, you know, where are you going to do that, you know?
Right.
Sub-Saharan Africa or next door to where the cows are, right? Because logistics and risk, you know, play into it. Same thing here. Is there a renaissance? Yeah, there's a lot coming back. Mexico's booming, right? From an assembly perspective. I know these gentlemen kind of come from the fab and from
the dark side.
From the dark side, right? All the componentry. And that'll be an interesting one because that tends to be more of a following trend than a leading trend in all of these things, right? So I'd be curious to hear the comments on that. But yeah, there's definitely, it's coming back. We see revenue, especially from assembly perspective in Mexico, probably doubling in the next 3 years, probably quadrupling in the next decade from an assembly perspective. So Mexico's booming. North America is going to come back in here. We're highly efficient, the numbers you said. Automation means less human jobs, right? It becomes more efficient. And so while as a percentage maybe it's gone down, our efficiency certainly as a nation has grown in the process.
So I mean, we've seen this whole progression of low-cost country, right? It started in Japan, then it went to Taiwan, now it's China. You know, what's next? You know, Eastern Europe, India. So is
Sub-Saharan Africa is the cheapest labor rates on the planet.
Is it really coming back, or are we just going to move it to the next low-cost country? Josh, what do you think?
There has to be a limit at how many times you move something around the world before someone figures out really what are we doing here. When everything went to China, it was almost like a stigma for buyers. You're not doing your job unless you're buying it from China, without thinking about what is it that I'm buying from China. A lot of the work that went over there kind of just didn't even belong. A lot of this medium volume stuff, a lot of the stuff where the demand wasn't, you know, fully predictable. And in my opinion, I think that's the part that's coming back just because they realized, you know, economics. It didn't make sense in the first place. So let's just bring it back here and at least start saving money or at least saving headache. As for a huge trend of regionalization, reshoring, yeah, I'm skeptical of everything I read in the paper, but in this case, I have a huge doubt that we're going to see things come back en masse to North America.
If the question is what's after China, I think we need to understand that there isn't in terms of the supply chain and what it offers, there isn't an equivalent of China behind China. China has 1.3 billion people. They're largely educated. They can supply a migrant labor force out to coastal cities that are willing to work overtime, live in dormitories, be highly productive. And there isn't another country in the pipeline after that has that same, either the scale, the mass of labor, of equivalent education with the work ethic that China has. Not to disparage other countries, but I think.
But there's infrastructure issues with India. There's infrastructure issues with
there's
Vietnam.
Infrastructure issues, bureaucracy issues, just even cultural issues. So that there's that particular combination that the global supply chains enjoyed in the last 10 years of the young, literate people that will move away from home for a few years that are willing to work as much overtime as they can get. And work very hard and be very productive. And I don't know if there is anything after China. If it is, it's going to be a composite of several countries.
And even if that generation does get lazy, like I guess mine is, but look at the vertical integration of the supply chain China has made. You know, they're not just doing the fab or the assembly there. They're making glass. They're treating resin. I mean, they're pulling it out of the ground and finishing it as a complete product. So how do you transplant that entire supply chain to another low-cost region? You might be able to pick up pockets of portions of the supply chain, but in terms of the economies of scale, I don't think you'll ever achieve that without topside planning.
That's a great point. Great point.
You know, and to China, and you guys, there's a lot that went there that shouldn't have gone there. And I know we're talking about what's coming back. You know, we conceive it as two humps on a camel's back, right? One larger, one smaller. 75% went to China, should go there. China's a great solution for a lot of things, right? The other smaller hump, about 25%, is exactly that, the lower volume, higher mix type stuff that probably shouldn't have gone there. When you see churn out of China, it's from that hump. It's not from the big high volume stuff. To your point, it's not coming back on loss. It makes no sense to do that.
But it makes politicians happy to put up a big headline and earn their job for the next 2 to 4 years.
And the reality is that the United States still is one of the biggest, largest markets, one of the largest, and we have the capabilities still to support a whole wide range of solutions for manufacturing across the sectors, across the spectrum. In country here, and there's the right stuff, right? It comes down to the fit. What are you going to put in there? And you know, so we're talking about labor costs, which has driven all this nonsense, you know, about everybody running around all the place. What we see with OEMs is going back to a real, and you see a lot more talk about it, the TCO, the total cost of ownership, total cost of outsourcing, call it what you want, analysis that goes beyond just the labor cost. And as long as you just have purchasing guys, you know, hitting the table saying, jeepers creepers, we need it cheaper, you know, that's easy, right? Unfortunately, that's hurt the industry. On the EMS side, the companies we work with have really suffered from that. It's changing, and I think that, you know, this industry can be very strong here again. It's not going to add 10% in the next couple of years to the, you know, of
GDP, right?
GDP or anything. It's not going to happen.
That's a great point. I think we'll explore TCO a little bit more in depth in a couple of minutes. Let me throw something at Shane, because Shane, you've got a really unique perspective of having major operations in the Americas, major operations in Asia. We can't compete on labor, but we can compete on efficiency, right? IHS Global just came out with a survey that said the average manufacturing wage in the U.S. is a little short of $20. In China, it's $2.18 an hour. But they came back and said that China needs 110 million workers to produce the same amount of work that 11.5 million workers in America can do, and that's a 10x factor. So how do we capitalize on that efficiencies?
Well, there's, I think, with a lot of economic data and the particular data points that are picked for effect, you need to dig down a couple layers. I think the U.S. productivity metrics contain things like, you know, Boeing airplanes and, you know, refineries that we build in the United States that are all counted as manufacturing jobs that are very high value add. And those types of jobs just aren't really developed in China yet. So what's being manufactured in China generally tends to be much lower value add, much more, you know, very closer to the commodity scale of what's being manufactured. So there's a little bit of disparity there, so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. That said, just within circuit boards, which is what I can speak to, the amount of value add that one operator generally can contribute to the manufacture of a circuit board in North America is different than it is in Asia. It doesn't have much to do with differences in one versus the other than experience and tenure. In Asia, I think the industry benchmark in Asia is turnover, depending on time of year, between 8 to 10% a month. So the average person just does not hang around. Plus, they, as I described earlier, they're generally what we would consider migrant. They generally are from somewhere else. They come in. They're not looking to make a career in circuit boards. Most people in North American PCB manufacturing are here, and we're in it for a career. So it's not uncommon to have a drill operator that has 20 plus years of experience, and we pay him for that. But he can do his own first article inspections. He can set up his machine. He can download the files from the server. He can, he can do everything. He can deliver a quality product to the next department, and he can kit his own drills. He can run 4 machines at once. He can do all this stuff. In China, the tasks are much more segmented. So this is a big, wide topic, but generally on a pure headcount basis, there just is not the same amount of value add, just because of the complete differences in the manufacturing paradigm between the two.
Great. I mean,
Applications.
Yash and everybody, how do we get customers out of that unit price mentality and focus them on total cost of ownership, where the risk and the inventory and logistics and the oil prices, how do we get them to get off of that unit cost?
I'm a huge believer just in customer education, getting them to think about what it is that they're doing, getting them to think about, okay, are you cool with buying your entire EAU one time as a single MOQ? People just don't think, and especially, at least in the automotive background that I used to be in, purchasing was a stepping stone to another place. So the way they made their mark was just price, price, price. Not TCO. It was what shows up on the spreadsheet that I report to my uppers, and that contributed to a lot of wrong decision making. And the good thing is, I think a lot of the bigger companies are on their own looking at TCO. One of my customers, GE, they're known as the gorilla that just smashes down suppliers, and they look at TCO. They earned
that reputation, by the way.
They did, but it was refreshing to see that they have a huge model that they use, and their spend with me, it went from a couple service parts and some emergencies to actual production. Low and medium volume, sporadic demand production, and it was justified in their TCO models, and the amount of money and time they put into saving money and time. I would love to think that we're actually providing that value add and the savings overall.
Do you guys, Eric and Shane, do you guys sell that when you go out and talk to people?
Yeah, let me just jump in here real quick, because that's what we focus on, the data and those costs and what that is. And we take the industry data from case studies from OEM EMS quote packages, and we look at this, right? And the risk, so the pricing, and it's pretty understandable what it is. The issue is risk, ultimately, right, in this. And in all of our data and all the analyses that we do, the one issue that correlates greatest with risk is the number of supply chains, time zones you put between where it's ordered and where it's fulfilled, right? It makes sense, right? You make it across the street, lower risk than you make it in India, right? In managing it from here. Every time. So what we talk to the OEMs about, and that's exactly it, and I agree with it, it is an educational process.
Right.
And getting it, and you have to talk beyond just the purchasing guys who are being rewarded for getting the lowest price, right? Because that's completely different than looking at the TCO analysis. And helping people understand what the costs are. So the labor rates that you quoted—
I saw you shaking your head when I said that.
They're not. The average labor rate for EMS services in the United States is in the 30s. Mm-hmm. China's been going up, and it's a story now we've been talking about for 3 years, about 1.5% a month. And that's going to continue going, right?
3x in the last 6 years,
yeah,
as my number shows.
It's going up over there, and it's not the dollar, it's not the $2. That's the direct. It's what's the fully burdened cost of labor. You have to do that analysis. And I'm amazed, and we've been talking about this a lot lately, how many OEMs that we're talking to don't understand that, because they have to say the same thing. I don't pay that much. I only pay $2, and it's like there's no way that yeah. they have to get all those costs back. They're paying for this. They're paying for the equipment and all that. So it is an educational process, but I think they're starting to get it, because I think more are looking at this. More are deciding to build. We've done more analyses in the last year for some smaller mid-tier OEMs who are doing it domestically, building domestically, but keep getting these quote packages from people from other side of the world saying we can do it cheaper. And these guys constantly said, can I really get it cheaper? And it's like, yeah, you can on a unit price, but let's look at the whole thing. And once you show them the analysis and the real data, they say, okay, thank you. They sleep well.
Plus, you got to throw in the PIA factor, right? Well, it's a pain in the ass to deal with overseas, and what's it worth to the buyer? Is it worth 2% on a $100,000 spend to go through all that headache or not?
Right.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with the points that you're making, but the one thing that we shouldn't underestimate is that the ship 2 point, as we're talking about fabs, bare printed circuit boards, the ship 2 points are increasingly migrating actually to Asia. So to take what you said and flip it, flip it the other way around. As much as we're hearing anecdotal stories about regionalization and certain companies putting product back in the United States, I would think that still the net critical mass movement is toward Asia. So when we talk about risk mitigation, we talk about inside same time zone, things like that, and where the buyers are increasingly being located with global scale companies, it's increasingly in Asia. So
and it'll be interesting to watch, and and you're right, because I'm talking more at the assembly level and that relationship, which is certainly different. You look at like Brazil and these countries like that, just expanded a bit, where they have that build in country requirement, right? Now we look at that, and there's a lot of interest in South America on these areas. But what happens is the companies go in there, the supply chain follows then, right? It builds afterwards. China didn't have it all when everybody started going for the cheap labor. It followed there. So I think, if the decision, and so going back to Apple, if Apple's going to do that here, is that really going to be a game changer? And will then the supply chain start migrating back and following? I don't know.
Right, and you bring up an excellent point. China didn't have it, but eventually, everything went over there. So if we're talking about the work that could come back, that should, you could justify it to be built in the U.S., you have to ask the question, okay, now who's going to build it? We lost so much capacity, so much capability, and so you have to actually build a home for that work first. Factories, people, and I think those you're going to find out are going to be the biggest challenges, especially from the fab side. How we could expand stateside.
Just one point I want to pick up just before we leave, because I know we're winding down here, but. China is a lot more about cheap labor, and it even was in the beginning. China is about, and I think this is one of the points you wanted to brush on too, Steve, China is also about ease of doing business. There are complications, cultural complications, foreign governments that we have to learn how to deal with, but when we talk about what it takes to turnkey a new factory anywhere in the world, I don't have experience putting factories all over the world, but I know that it's much easier in China than it is in the United States. Just getting permits in the Bay Area to rotate plating tanks around takes about as long as it takes to get a complete factory built in China. I mean, I'm saying that for a fact, but it's incredibly burdensome. The regulatory framework here, and let's not underestimate the income tax structure. If you take an ROI consideration of say a large $100 million factory, and you're going to put it in the United States and pay 35% income tax, plus state income tax and wherever you're located and wherever your sales go to, versus say 15% if you're a high new technology enterprise in China. Just from a pure financial ROI standpoint, you're going to continue to want to build in China. I would love to see that change.
Absolutely. Let me cut you off, Eric. I know you want to say something. Let me switch gears real quick, because Shane brought up a good point I wanted to touch on is the political aspect of this, and the Boeing case, the NLRB and the government unions trying to shut that company from doing business in a low-cost state, if you will, right? This recent proposal to make it a $9 minimum wage. Are we getting too oppressive? Shane talked about taxes. Okay, are we making it unattractive to build in America? It sounds like we are.
Well, I think, first of all, the NLRB thing, I think you'll see challenged, because as you also know, with the court against the NLRB and the appointments are now being, so everything that was decided with these people on that NLRB is probably going to be challenged moving forward, and I think this is going to be a marquee one for that. But I think it is all political, and so I was hearing Shane talking about the part in China. What's the big difference? China is investing in all this. China is also a communist nation that can control things and dictate things, right? We're here, it's a democracy, we're a little messier, right? But there is certainly, they've made and a lot of these companies get a lot of financial support in China, not necessarily foreign ones, but the domestic ones. We look at their financials, all of a sudden there's an influx of cash from somewhere, and it's generally a loan or something coming from the government. And it's in some ways an uneven playing field, but that's just the reality that we have to deal with.
Right, and we always look at taxes, and the debates are all about corporate taxes, this and that, but what about S-Corps? Mitt Romney only touched on it once in a debate, and kind of, it was exciting to think about. Now maybe people will talk about it, but the conversation dropped off. The tax implications for an S corp are just profoundly different than when you're a C corp, because if we make $1 million and we invest that whole $1 million back into the company, we'll go bankrupt because the IRS will come after us because I still owe taxes on the on the million. And with the rates the way they're going, we're going to be pushing 50 points, right?
Absolutely.
So it stifles
Absolutely.
investment, stifles the reinvestment that's required to actually grow a company, let alone put money into training, things that pay a return in the future. And that's a huge impediment to bringing things back stateside.
We got about 60 seconds left. Let me just throw this last out for you guys to talk about real briefly. Can North America be a low-cost country, and in what cases can we be?
Mexico is low cost.
Are
Mexico's
there,
our
are there,
low cost.
are there market niches? Are there
So is
technologies?
Detroit now.
I would answer that as saying North America shouldn't strive to be a low-cost country. It should recognize that it's more of a service provider than it is a low-cost manufacturing.
Yeah, that's a
region.
great
It
way
needs
to put it.
Sell that. It needs to enhance that further.
But the beauty of regionalization, like we said before, is that every region has its low-cost part. North America has Mexico, Europe has Eastern Europe, Asia has China, but other countries. There's stuff migrating out of China into other places up there. Thailand is competitive, Vietnam issues, but can be competitive on this. So there's low-cost regions and all. Singapore used to be low-cost, right? Look at it now. There's no way it's low-cost. So things change, and you.
Yeah.
Excellent, great. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us today. This is Steve Williams with Real Time with IPC, and thanks for tuning in.